Call to duty. We'll give you a full report on Oregon Field Guide Thursday night at 8:30.
Fellow citizens, we cannot escape history.
Woke up this morning with my mind.
Saturday night at 9, here on OPB.
Good evening. I'm Robert McNeil in New York.
And I'm Judy Woodruff in Washington. After our summary of the news this Wednesday, we look at what the voters of New Hampshire were saying and how much trouble that spells for President Bush. We'll be joined by Gergen and Shields +1. Then a panel of Democrats analyzes what yesterday's outcome means to them and their party.
Funding for the McNeil-Lehrer NewsHour has been provided by PepsiCo. Part of helping the world live and communicate better is keeping it well informed. That's why funding for the NewsHour is also provided by AT&T and by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and viewers like you.
It was a day of Wednesday morning quarterbacking for the presidential candidates who ran in yesterday's New Hampshire primary. The final results in the Republican race put President Bush 16 points ahead of challenger Patrick Buchanan. Some analysts saw it as close enough to signal re-election trouble for the president, but Mr. Bush called it a good victory. He spoke to reporters on arrival in Knoxville, Tennessee this morning.
Now, I'm not saying that I wouldn't have liked to do better, but I'm satisfied with the results, and now we're down here, and we're going to take this guy on in every single state. I'd have to do a little definition of who it is, because all I did was lay back and get hammered by these Democrats, and to some degree by Pat. And so it's a new ball game. I'm not taking anything for granted. I'm going to stay out here across this country, and I've been in tough fights before, roll up my sleeves and go after them.
Patrick Buchanan reveled in his closer-than-expected finish, but he said that primaries in the next 3 weeks, particularly Georgia, will provide a higher hurdle for him than New Hampshire. He spoke this morning in Bedford, New Hampshire.
We won a tremendous victory here last night, and our message is today resonating across this nation and around the world. Here at home, the firestorm is beginning across this country, and the Middle American Revolution is on. But the challenge ahead, we concede, is daunting. There are 13 primaries, I believe, in the next 3 weeks. And Mr. Bush is about to deploy all the king's horses and all the king's men to defeat us.
The Democratic race also had a closer-than-predicted finish, but as expected, former Massachusetts Senator Paul Tsongas was the winner. Last week, tracking polls had put Tsongas as much as 15 points ahead of his nearest rival, Arkansas Governor Bill Clinton. In the end, Clinton narrowed the gap to finish 9 points behind. Third place went to Nebraska Senator Bob Kerrey, followed by Iowa Senator Tom Harkin and former California Governor Jerry Brown. This afternoon, Tsongas turned to one of his next big tests, the Maryland primary, less than 2 weeks away. He appeared at a rally in Baltimore and talked about yesterday's results.
2 outsiders won last night. 2 outsiders won in New Hampshire. I won. I'm a Washington outsider. I put my energies into helping this economy outside of Washington. President Bush is an outsider as well. He's put his energies in being productive outside the United States.
Governor Clinton headed for Georgia, which holds a primary on March 3rd. He spoke this afternoon at a rally in Atlanta where he referred to his New Hampshire experience.
Here in Atlanta, you can imagine what I have been through in New Hampshire. They may be the comeback kid, the political version of the Atlanta Braves.
We will have much more on the New Hampshire results right after the news summary.
In economic news, the Labor Department said consumer prices rose a scant 0.1% in January, the best performance since July. Falling energy costs and lower food prices were cited as the reason. After inflation, the department said the average weekly paycheck shrank 0.7% in January, the first decline in 3 months. In a separate report, the Commerce Department said housing starts jumped 5.5% last month, a 2-year high. Federal Reserve Chairman Alan Greenspan expressed long-term optimism about the economy today. He spoke before the House Banking Committee.
The recovery that seemed to be in train at the time of our last report to the Congress stalled. Job losses have mounted, and confidence remains low. Looking forward, though, there are reasons to believe that business activity should pick up. Indeed, anecdotal reports and early data seem to be indicating that spending is starting to firm in some sectors. In addition, a number of measures suggest that the balance sheets of many households and businesses have been strengthened, a development that should facilitate spending in a recovery.
Late yesterday, the Federal Reserve eased regulations to allow the nation's banks to lend an additional $8 billion to stimulate the economy.
It was the manufacturers' turn today to present their case at the Food and Drug Administration hearings on the safety of silicone gel breast implants. The new president of Dow Corning, a leading manufacturer of the devices, promised greater cooperation with the FDA in resolving safety questions. But Dow Corning and other manufacturers told the panel that no studies to date have shown a definite link between breast implants and autoimmune diseases, such as rheumatoid arthritis and lupus. One industry spokesman was Tim Long of Bioplasty Incorporated.
In our opinion, none of the new evidence presented to this panel supports overturning your previous recommendation regarding the continued availability of silicone gel devices. Granted, there has been some circumstantial evidence that can be found on both sides of the issues of autoimmune disorders. The evidence raised regarding the cause and effect relationship between breast implants and autoimmune disorders are not supported by valid scientific data.
Last month, the FDA placed a moratorium on the use of silicone implants. The advisory panel will hear more testimony tomorrow before making a recommendation to the FDA. Judge Clarence Thomas issued a ruling declaring a government affirmative action program for women unconstitutional. Thomas wrote the opinion for the U.S. Court of Appeals before joining the Supreme Court last November. The ruling was released to the public today, along with other opinions. Thomas said the affirmative action program resulted in reverse discrimination against men. The ruling overturned a Federal Communications Commission decision which gave special preference to a Maryland woman who wanted to build a radio station.
Former Irish Republican Army member Joseph Doherty was deported to Britain today. He'd been seeking political asylum in the United States. A British court sentenced Doherty to life in prison in 1981 after he was found guilty of the machine gun killing of a British soldier in Northern Ireland. Doherty escaped from a Belfast prison before his trial and was eventually arrested in New York in 1983. The U.S. Supreme Court rejected his final appeal for asylum last month. That's it for the news summary. Just ahead, New Hampshire sent Republicans a message, but what's the message for Democrats?
The political fallout of the New Hampshire primary is our lead and only focus tonight. We'll look at what the results mean for both parties, starting with the surprise on the Republican side. As we reported earlier, the official results show Patrick Buchanan won 37% of the vote against President Bush's 53%. The challenger's strong showing sent shockwaves through the GOP around the country. Buchanan met with reporters in Bedford, New Hampshire this morning. President Bush responded from Knoxville, Tennessee. Here are some excerpts.
For us to have a fighting chance, Republicans have to start climbing down off the fence, standing up and being counted the way the people of New Hampshire have stood up and were counted, because we can't defeat this mighty establishment alone. We intend to go south and fight on all fronts. Three major basic issues: the American economy and the horrific impact of Mr. Bush's abandonment of Republican principles. Second, a new foreign and trade policy for the United States that casts aside all this globalist nonsense about a new world order and starts to put America first. Third, an end to the one-party government in Washington, which requires new leadership not only in the White House, but a new Congress that represents the people and will stand up to the special interests, the lobbyists, the registered and unregistered agents of influence, the bureaucrats, and the regulators who control so much of our destiny. Finally, I think this tremendous showing which the people of New Hampshire gave us and this vote of confidence they have given us entitles us to a face-to-face debate with Mr. Bush, and we want that debate.
Later, he was asked, if you were George Bush, why would you debate Pat Buchanan?
I think this, that Mr. Bush has clearly gotten a wake-up call from the people of New Hampshire in this campaign. I think he had best recognize and realize that he is out of touch with the mainstream of the Republican Party when a candidate, an insurgent candidate, can walk into a state and take 40% of the independent and Republican vote away from him in a 10-week campaign that begins from scratch. And that he's going to have to begin addressing the issues and concerns inside his own party. And I think it would be a good thing for him. And secondly, I think if he doesn't do it, he is going to reinforce this impression that his people are basically in control because they have the machinery and the power and the office and the money and all the rest of it. And we are in the year of the outsider. And I think he's going to have to connect with the people who want the issues debated.
I think there was a lot of pounding on me. 5 Democrats, 1 Republican, and certain editorial policy up there that for 9 weeks did nothing but hit me with no defense on my part. Some of these congressmen with me today said, hey, since when has an 18-point victory been considered anything other than a landslide? So we're going to go forward now. The other thing I got to do, though, I do think I have to do better, is get this message to the country, and particularly these southern states, if you want an election contest, about what we're trying to do to help people that are hurting, what we're trying to do in the Congress, to enlist support to get our sound proposals through and beat back the Democratic proposals.
Mr. President, you say you need to define Pat Buchanan. How do you define him?
Well, we're debating that. You just tell the truth. You just tell the truth. Well, I don't think Social Security ought to be voluntary. That's the Bush position. Well, people go ask him what he thinks about it.
What's the risk having a divided party in the fall if you attack him hard?
Well, that's a danger, but he doesn't worry about that. I've been attacked hard.
You think he's
I think I've seen that, and but it's much better to stay on the positive plane. I'll point out what I'm for. I was for what Tennessee did in supporting Desert Storm. I am for protecting those on Social Security. And there's a wide array of things that we can point out that are positive, and then you all can make the interpretation. That's the kind side. Might not be as gentle as just forgetting about it altogether. But I was a little sick and tired of getting pounded by 5 Democrats day in and day out, not responding, and similarly by the Republican challenger whom I beat by 18 points. And I'm going to stay, taking a positive message across the country.
The 18-point margin the president was referring to shrank a bit to 16 points when the final results were reported this afternoon. For a closer look at what happened yesterday and what it could spell for the future, we turn now to our own team of Gergen and Shields plus 1. The 1 is Mark Nuttall, a veteran Republican strategist who ran the Pat Robertson campaign in 1988. He joins us tonight from public station KETA in Oklahoma City. David Gergen is editor-at-large at U.S. News and World Report, and Mark Shields is a syndicated columnist. Mark, should the president be satisfied, as he put it, with a landslide victory. He was talking 18%. We find out now it may be 16% or something else.
The president put a brave face on what was a shocking experience for the Bush re-election campaign. They did not expect, they had set an unrealistic threshold for Pat Buchanan of 40%, expecting that he would never get anywhere near it and that they could declare victory. And even had Richard Nixon, former president, doing their bidding on the air, and they were just shocked. The Buchanan thing started moving the last 10 days, 2 weeks, and they felt it, and then started to say, if we win by one vote, it's a victory.
David, is it significant that it turns out it may not be 40% that Pat Buchanan got, it may be 37%? You just said, you were telling me before the show that these numbers may change again, is that right?
Well, they may change. Mark was saying that actually, that they in the recounting there may be some shift around, but I think, look, the damage has been done. It could be 37, it could be 38, it could be 36. The fact is that while the president did put a brave face on it, the word from the White House today is he's angry. He's angry that this man got this kind of vote. He's angry that Pat Buchanan is in this race. He regards him as a journalist who ought to stay in his place, in effect, has no place running elective politics, and he now plans to take him on. And I think it was very clear from his comments today. What the White House is saying is, we're going to sharpen the differences. What they really mean is they're going to sharpen their knives, and they're going to go after him.
But Mark Nuttall, what can Pat Buchanan do after this? I mean, he's technically, as I understand it, is he able to get the nomination given the number of states he's shut out
of? No, he's not. The thing to remember is that 25% of the delegates to the Republican National Convention are elected through caucus states. It requires an enormous organization, both in sophistication and training, to be able to deliver a caucus state. Pat Buchanan doesn't have the organization, he doesn't have the time that's required or the money to put that together. That's 25%. In addition to that, he missed the ballot in a couple of key states, particularly New York, and there are a couple of states that have open primary ballots that delegates are slated, either directly or indirectly. You must have an organization to deliver the vote to those slates, like in Illinois, and that's worth about another 10%. And then last but not least, the president is not going to be shut out of threshold delegates. Just like Pat Buchanan got 9 delegates for getting 40% of the vote. Even if he were to get 60 to 70% of the vote in all the rest of the states, the president's going to get 30 to 40, and the threshold delegates getting 15 to 20% will get him another 15 to 20% of the delegates. So only California is winner take all. So no, technically, I don't see how he can possibly get the nomination.
So Mark, if he can't, then what's going on?
Well, with all due respect to Mark Nuttall, whom I have enormous respect, I don't think it's arithmetic, it's chemistry. I mean, if you describe a situation where George Bush was getting beat 60 to 30, then the hue and the cry and the anxiety level among Republicans whose names are going to be on the ballot this fall would be scared stiff that they'd have somebody at the top of the ticket who was going to take them down with them, would be so loud and so pervasive that George Bush would be pressured to step aside. I'm not arguing with the argument he made. What I'm saying is if Pat Buchanan ever caught on like that, I think Pat Buchanan does face a couple of serious challenges right now. He's going south where the economy is not as bad as it was in New Hampshire. The pain is not as widespread. He's going to Georgia where the unemployment rate is half what it was in New Hampshire. And he's got to remember the lesson right now, strategically, of Ronald Reagan in 1976 when he challenged President Ford and went through a series of defeats. And then finally realized he had to pick his terrain. He picked North Carolina, did Ronald Reagan, and he won. Pat Buchanan has to pick a state right now where he can take on George Bush that's small enough and manageable enough and where he could beat him.
What is that state, David? Is there a state coming up?
Well, I tend to agree with Mark Nuttall. I don't see a state where Pat Buchanan can beat George Bush, but I'm not sure that's the point of this. We're not looking at a Reagan-Ford fight of 1976. As Lynn Nofziger pointed out today, George Bush is a much better campaigner than Jerry Ford was, and Pat Buchanan is not as good a campaigner as Ronald Reagan was, and he doesn't have the organization that Reagan had. What we are looking at is a insurgency by Buchanan that's going to bleed the president. It's going to weaken him. It's going to extend out the argument. It may bring splits within the Republican ranks. It may weaken the president for the fall. That's the significance of the campaign for 1992. It also now has significance for 1996 for the Republican Party.
All right, weaken the president, bleed the president, as you put it. Mark Nuttall, you know the South well. How much damage can Pat Buchanan do there to this president?
Well, first, let me say I agree with both Mark and David. Let me just restate it this way, that Pat Buchanan cannot win the nomination unless George Bush quits. So if he can knock him out, it has to be a knockout strategy.
You all don't disagree
and he
with
is
that.
Totally
leading
agree.
him, but possibly making helping him in this regard. George Bush's problem is not Pat Buchanan. If you look at the exit polls of who voted for Pat Buchanan, it was mainly a protest vote. But the scary thing is they said, even though I've sent a message, I am not going to vote for George Bush in the general election. One of the most ludicrous things that one of the spinmeisters said was that we had a large independent crossover vote. Well, good grief, what do you think independents do in the general election? And what kind of a signal does that send? Now, what George Bush has got to do is clarify his message to ticket-splitting, middle-class, working Democrats that are, it's a broader category than just Reagan Democrats, who are not hearing, one, how he is different from this Congress that he's running against, because the message that he's being pounded with from Pat Buchanan and the Democrats is that he was part of the problem in the budget process, part of the problem in raising taxes and making deals. And therefore, when he says send Congress a message, it doesn't compute. And second, what programs is he going to implement for jobs? And he has to tailor those state by state and make those more relevant by region, where people will listen to it. If he doesn't do that too, Judy, by the way, he's got 3 weeks to appeal to these ticket-splitting Democrats who may participate in the Democratic primary. And it doesn't mean they've made a decision in their mind consciously of who they're going to vote for president. But these are people who voted for Jimmy Carter and have voted Democrat prior to 1980. And if we lose them, and it is our burden to bring them back in the general election, then it's an issue the Democrats have to present us with so that we'll have an argument to give them a reason to cross that threshold and to satisfy that burden.
Does either one of you disagree with that it's those blue-collar Democrats, the broader definition than just the Reagan Democrat, that the president has now got to reach out and
well, I think it is. I think Mark has identified what George Bush's specific political problem is precisely. But I think, and the figure he cited or alluded to was that 1/2 of the people who voted for Pat Buchanan in New Hampshire yesterday said they intended to vote for a Democrat in the fall. Now, they may not do that, but what it does mean is there's a predisposition of hostility or skepticism toward George Bush, which means that George Bush then has to spend an amount of his time, which is pretty finite as a candidate, wooing his own base, going back to his own base of support and asking them to give him another validation. The last candidate who did this was Jimmy Carter in 1980, who spent a good part of October caressing the erogenous zones of the Democratic body politic to tell them that he still loved them and wanted them to love him. And I think that's what Bush faces right now.
I think his dilemma is pretty deep, and I agree with Mark about the kind of appeal he has to make. The dilemma I see he has is he's got these next 3 weeks in which he's going to travel extensively. Starting next Tuesday, he's basically going to be on the road for 2 weeks, traveling through much of the South. And yet we saw when he went into New Hampshire, and he spent his time there, he did not move voters in his direction. The insurgency continued, Pat Buchanan continued to rise, which says that when he's on the road, he doesn't have a message. And I think his fundamental problem is how do you invent a message that's going to work in the next 3 weeks? I mean,
well, what do you say? I mean, how do you refine?
Job.
Mark Nuttall talked about refining the message that's there. What does the president say that he hasn't already said?
The problem is not the Bush campaign. The problem is the Bush presidency. I mean, it goes back to last November when he said he was going to stay tuned, listen to me, we're going to define this presidency on the State of the Union, and we're still looking for a definition. And there was no definition to carry New Hampshire. There isn't going to be one to carry to Oklahoma or Tennessee.
Yeah, I think his problem is going to be the definition. Increasingly, is going to be defining Pat Buchanan. Not trying to define.
That's what they started. That's what they started with today, Judy.
That's
on the social issue of voluntary Social Security and opposing the war in the Persian Gulf.
That's right.
Are those issues, Mark Nuttall, that Pat Buchanan is vulnerable on in the South and in any other state he's going to take the presidency?
Let me reiterate. Pat Buchanan is not the problem here. The president must define his own campaign. He is not going to get the nomination unless George Bush quits. The wrong strategy would be to just completely debate Pat Buchanan on his strengths and weaknesses. It was a protest vote in New Hampshire, and the people are frustrated. There was a common theme in last year's elections that still hasn't been addressed at the national election. Between the Louisiana governorship, the Pennsylvania Senate race, the New Jersey House race, and the Mississippi governor's race were 2 Democratic upsets and 2 Republican upsets. That was based on 2 basic things. One, Congress is out of control, it's not accountable, it's insensitive, it's arrogant, and it is inefficient, and it can't solve our problems. Then we're in an economic recession, and they're looking to government for answers. And who is going to lead us around this inept Congress and give us some solutions to our everyday problems on the economy, on health care, welfare, social services, and a chance for a better future education. And until he defines that, Pat Buchanan's not going to be his problem. That's not where he should go.
But you're not saying the president isn't capable of doing that. Any one of you.
But I think he's onto something that's very important. In some basic ways, George Bush probably would help himself a lot more by staying in Washington 4 or 5 days each of the next 3 weeks, trying to whip the Congress into shape to pass his economic program, and not simply going on the road. I think if he went on the road on the weekends but showed that he was a working president, I think there are a lot of people in this country who are suddenly beginning to ask the question, who's going to be president for the next year if we're going to be so wrapped up in a political campaign? I think what he needs to do is demonstrate that he's a successful president with a program for the future more than give speeches.
Would that do it?
George Bush is caught on the Persian Gulf in a very strange way. The Persian Gulf was the aberration of the Bush presidency. He was resolute, he was directed, he went to the public, he made his case. It was a short time frame, and his objective was achieved. And people say, well, why, if he really cared that much and did that, what about the economy? And there's a problem of resoluteness and consistency and carry and commitment on the domestic issues. And I don't think that is solved by, it certainly wasn't solved at the Pinkerton Academy in New Hampshire last Saturday with the dancing girls and Arnold Schwarzenegger.
But what about what David says, staying in Washington, looking presidential and holding Congress's feet to the fire?
If he says, what is the, I mean, David said it 3 months ago in this broadcast, and I hate to give him credit for being that prophetic, but I mean, he said he's got to pick one thing and do it. It can't be the issue of the day. And I'll tell you, the worst thing that could happen to George Bush is to go after Pat Buchanan, savage him, get rid of him, and somehow destroy it, because the problem is still there. It isn't going to go away.
I hear you all agreeing on that. That you all three are saying.
Absolutely.
All right. Robin is going to be talking to guests later on the Democrats, but let's just spend the couple of minutes that we have left talking about this race here. And Mark, Nuttall, I want to come back to you. What does Bill Clinton need to do, or maybe I should turn it around, what can Paul Tsongas do to defy the conventional wisdom that he can't win outside the Northeast?
Well, the first thing he's got to do is continue the theme that he really started emphasizing about 2 weeks ago. And that is when he made the statement that the Democratic Party has spent too much time just worrying about the poor, even though the poor are important and we must provide a social safety net in this country, that we must also be aware of the working class and those who provide the goods and services that are taxed, and that it must be part of the formula that is thought of primarily. The second he started doing that and emphasizing that, he started moving in the polls. Yes, Clinton had problems, and he picked up some benefit from that, but at the same time, that was the theme. Those are the types of themes that people are looking for. That was the message that was sent in the off-year elections last year, and that is the type of leadership that ticket-splitting Democrats primarily and conservative, even Republican, independent Republicans are looking for. If he can continue that, I think, and right now it's between he and Clinton on those themes.
But you're saying he has the potential to do that outside New England. David, do you agree with that?
I'm really curious about this. Mark Nuttall knows the South very, very well. Do you think that the, quote, good old boys, Mark, will stick with Clinton all the way through this, or do you think some may break off? Do you think some of the minority vote may break off? My assumption is that Bill Clinton goes in with a very, very strong appeal to black voters who make up a disproportionate number of voters in the Democratic primaries.
Well, I think that he has the natural base. He's from the region. He speaks the language. Plus, he has some people that mapped this for him very carefully early on in his campaign strategy. In his opening kickoff speeches, he used some words very carefully, like New Covenant, that were by design to reach out to both conservatives and the religious community, of which the South is more so than, say, well, certainly the Northeast, but even the West. And if though, he can hold that. He's got some other problems. And I don't know that some of the ideological conservative vote won't split away from him because of that.
Yeah. Mark, what about Tsongas having appeal outside New England?
Well, Tsongas, this is the question. I mean, can Tsongas go out of his basic home region, the Northeast? He's expected to do well in the Maine caucuses this coming Sunday. And his profile, I mean, he's riding a crest. There's no question about it right now. I mean, Paul Tsongas will get a lift coming out of New Hampshire. And whether it carries in the South, Judy, comes down to whether, in fact, he can relate to the base of the Democratic Party. The profile of his support in New Hampshire was disproportionately upper education and upper income. Over $75,000 income, he got 50% of the vote. People in postgraduate levels, who represented 1/4 of the New Hampshire Democratic primary, he got 50% again. Now, I don't know what that
But that's not going to be the Democratic spread.
That probably isn't the same profile you're going to run into among Democrats in Georgia.
I didn't mean to say disproportionate. Minorities make up a large proportion. The big race is in Maryland right now, March 3rd, for Clinton and Tsongas.
Gentlemen, thank you all. Robin?
And now to the Democrats. New Hampshire voters selected, apparently, the two most conservative candidates as the first and second place winners yesterday. Paul Tsongas, who calls himself the pro-business candidate, and Bill Clinton, who, among other things, recently chaired the moderate Democratic Leadership Council. We turn now to some longtime Democrats on what this means to the party's message. In Washington are George McGovern, the 1972 nominee for president, and John White, former chairman of the Democratic National Committee. With me is Harriet Woods, twice a Senate candidate, now head of the National Women's Political Caucus. On Capitol Hill is Congresswoman Maxine Waters of California, a senior advisor to the National Rainbow Coalition. And in Belle Harbor, Florida, Richard Trumka, the president of the United Mine Workers of America. Harriet Woods, has New Hampshire produced a candidate satisfactory to you?
Well, I want to say something from our viewpoint. Caucus supports women, of course, at both parties. But all of the Democratic candidates are very good on what we would call the women's agenda. Tsongas, of course, has his neoliberal perspective, but in terms of social policies, he's great for women. I think more than that, what is intriguing to me, he represents exactly what we say make women candidates good: the outsider, the problem solver, the new perspective, emphasis on the domestic agenda. Those are things that women are concerned about. That's what the gender gap has been about since 1980. So we, in a way, have the country swinging to that agenda, and those are women's concerns. He's the only one who got a gender gap, was Tsongas.
Congresswoman Waters, did New Hampshire produce a candidate satisfactory to you?
Well, I don't think that New Hampshire provides us with the kind of voter base that tells us what these candidates can do in other parts of the country. I think they have a long way to go. They all have a lot of potential, but none of them have began to talk about the issues that concerns me and my community and those of us who have worked with Jesse Jackson in the Rainbow Coalition.
Does that disqualify them that they haven't done that, or can they remedy that in your view?
They certainly can remedy that, and the sooner they discover that they can't win without us, the sooner they will remedy it.
Yeah. John White, did New Hampshire produce a candidate you think could lead the Democratic Party to victory?
Well, I can certainly support any one of the candidates quite easily from that standpoint. That's not to say that I don't recognize the fact that there's a considerable element of the Democratic Party that would like to see somebody else. But I think as time goes on, we'll become more accustomed to these new candidates, and I can support any of them.
Can you define the element in the Democratic Party that would like somebody else? Can you sort of put a description on it, an ideological or regional description on it?
Well, I haven't seen exactly the breakdown figures from that standpoint, but I am aware, of course, that there have been a tremendous amount of conversation, phone calls, and people trying to search for another candidate. I don't think it's practical that it's going to happen, but I think that's one of the things that our candidates, particularly the two leaders, are going to have to address, and that to make sure that from the standpoint of these particular people that need to be reassured that we have presented the very best possible candidate. And I think they will be able to do that, but it's not done yet.
It's not done yet. George McGovern, is it done yet? Has your party got a candidate who can win in November now?
Well, I think we all have to recognize that Paul Tsongas has done a remarkable thing. He's virtually come out of nowhere to win this race. One thing I've observed is that all five of these candidates have gotten better as the campaign has progressed. I think that's one of the valuable things about a bid for the presidency that takes you all over the country. They steadily improve. I would add this, though, Robin. I was thinking just before this program, it's just 20 years ago that I was in the New Hampshire primary. I got more votes and a higher percentage of the votes than Paul Tsongas did, but I went on from there later in the year to lose 49 states to Richard Nixon. So one primary doesn't make an election. I think you're going to see some changes in Paul Tsongas as we move along. We've got a lot of important tests. He's going to continue to grow, but so are these other candidates. This nomination has just barely begun. We're through the first primary state, but they're still, most of them are still out there ahead of us.
Richard Trumka, the candidate most closely identified by the press anyway with organized labor, was Senator Harkin, who came fourth in the exercise in New Hampshire. Does New Hampshire produce a candidate you can love?
Well, first of all, Robin, I don't think that New Hampshire has produced a candidate. I think it's been very important for a couple of reasons. One, it says that the American workers and the American voter understands that the country's in deep trouble, that it is going in the wrong direction, that politics as usual is not going to make it, that sloganeering isn't going to do it, that making excuses and blaming Congress or blaming somebody else is not enough, that George Bush is not the leader to bring us out of that, the mess that we're in. What the American population, the voter, wants is to see policies discussed that'll bring us out, rejuvenate the economy, give us more jobs, protect jobs, talk about health care, talk about stricter enforcements of trade laws so that we do unto others as they do unto you. And I think New Hampshire has only started that debate. And the bright spot about New Hampshire is that I think this election, the American electorate is going to demand from all of the candidates that they talk about programs and how they're going to do that. Not just a slogan, not just a 30-second snippet, but put some meat on the bone and show us how you're going to do it.
Let's look at the two Democratic winners in New Hampshire in a little more detail here. Mr. Trumka, what is wrong with Tsongas as a candidate? I mean, why wouldn't he be the leader to take the Democratic Party through to November and defeat George Bush?
Well, I think any one of the Democratic candidates would be an improvement for the country. I think they've all started talking about the right policies, and I think they are all in the right direction. Tsongas, I think, hasn't talked enough about working people and about what he'd do to help them. He's talked about being pro-business, and I think that's a good thing for him to say. But he hasn't talked about how he's pro-American, pro-worker, pro-middle class. What he would do, for instance, to bring tax fairness to the middle class, to working class people. What he would do to make education, college education, more affordable to workers and bring more money to secondary schools, how he would do that. I think he's talked a lot about programs, but I don't think he's talked about it from a worker's perspective.
But does that disqualify him? The fact that he hasn't talked about those things in your eyes, does that mean he's just not a viable candidate for you and you're going to look for somebody else?
Well, I don't think it means he's not a viable candidate. I think he is a viable candidate. The person who articulates the issues, I think, more closely to how we would articulate them and the solutions that we'd like to see has been a couple of the other candidates. And I'm not just going to speak from my own personal point of view, but I'll try to talk from Labor's point of view. I think there are two other candidates who speak more closely to that.
You know, Harriet Woods, with that sort of attitude from organized labor at the moment, or those kinds of reservations, what do you think Paul Tsongas' weaknesses are? I mean, is he the man, in your eyes, who could take the party through and...
Well, I think the issue always has been, one, his electability, and I think...
Does that still bother you? Is that still a big issue in your mind?
I think he's not been tested enough, and I think that's true, and I think that's what you're hearing from everyone. We have a handful of very credible candidates who have not yet really gone through enough primaries or enough tests to see who the voters are going to select. In terms of Tsongas, I think he's gotten a very simple, direct message through that people have grasped. Now the question is, how is he going to spell out the details as they relate to different constituencies? You know, he can, there's a moving of, to the right, apparently, the backlash politics that Buchanan has created that creates an opening. But the Democrats can't abandon their...
A bad day for liberals in New Hampshire, in other words. Yeah.
Well, but the Democrats can't abandon their traditional base either. And, of course, I speak from the gender gap. 54% more of the registered voters are women, and they vote disproportionately larger than men, too. They're going to be looking for someone who talks the bread and butter issues and jobs, but also the things that are going on in their lives. So he has not yet really addressed those issues, and I think that's important.
So that's three of you who think that Tsongas is maybe a good candidate. He just hasn't addressed all the issues you want to hear. John White, what about you on that ground? Is it just a question of Tsongas not addressing the issues, or how do you feel about the electability question?
Well, I have a little different approach to this. If our candidates had been able to win on being right on the issues that most of the Democratic Party, Jimmy Carter would have been reelected, Walter Mondale would have been elected rather easily, and so would have the caucus. I think most people who are voting for president, it's the most serious vote they cast. Issues are important. Ideas are important. But basically, it's a matter of trust, a matter of feeling about that person that you're going to turn your country over to and the livelihood of your children and this, that, and another. And very often, specific issues take a secondary role to that. And I think these candidates, young, have to make, and Tsongas is the leader, the challenge is to make America and the Democrats and the independents and hopefully a few Republicans that this is a man that we can trust America with.
Do you think he can do that? Do you think he's got the stuff as a person to do that?
Well, that's the biggest challenge of the game. If you can do that, you can win. If you can't do that, I don't care where you are on the issues, you're not going to win.
How do you feel about that, Congressman Waters, that it's not just saying the right things on the issues? Well, you heard what Mr. White just said, that it's just being a man the country can trust.
I think there's a lot to that. I think the American people feel as if the Republicans have let them down. They've tricked them. The Republicans waved the red, white, and blue flag in the chambers of commerce around this country, talked about love of country while they literally sold out America. They allowed for tax credits. They didn't tie them to reinvestment in plant and equipment. The trickle down really has done the American people in, starting with Reagan, right on through Bush. And they feel betrayed. They are looking for someone they can trust, someone who's honest even if they don't agree with them, someone who talks about what he or she believes in and helps them to understand that they can trust them.
Well, have the Democrats in Tsongas found that man yet, do you think?
Well, let me tell you, I think that he's made a good showing. I think the people believe that he is honest, that what he's saying he means. And that's a very important first step. The real debate has not started yet. We have a long way to go. This is a big country and a lot of primaries ahead of us. And I think they all still must be put to the test. But they kind of like what they see in him because at least they think he's telling the truth.
George McGovern, how do you feel about Tsongas on those?
Well, I agree with what has been said about Paul Tsongas' character. He is a man that tells the truth as he sees it. He's a person of strong character. I think what we haven't yet seen is a compelling vision for the future of the country. This is what is missing in George Bush. We listened to that State of the Union message. I didn't see much of what he calls the vision thing. He used that phrase rather derisively when he first used it, but I do think that one of the tests of a successful presidential contender and of a successful president is to have some guiding vision as to the kind of a country he wants to see America become. To me, the issue that hasn't really been addressed effectively by either the Republicans or the Democrats so far is the question of what America is going to do in the post-Cold War period. For almost a half century, the battle against the Soviet Union in the Cold War has been the guiding and organizing principle of American life. Now that's over. The Soviet Union is gone, and I think we need to ask ourselves, how in this post-Cold War period are we going to repair our country? How will we make up the enormous deficits here at home in our cities, in the infrastructure, in health care, the terrific cost that we've had to pay out for this Cold War that has resulted in all the neglect of our own society? Those questions have to be addressed, and we have to define our new role in the world. It's not a question of isolationism. It's a question of what we're going to do in the post-Cold War period at home and abroad.
We've gone around on Clinton's, on Tsongas' sort of credits and liabilities. Mr. McGovern, what about Clinton? I mean, does he answer more what you're talking about? Or are his pluses and minuses no better than Tsongas's?
I think probably Bill Clinton has thought more about the kind of a presidency he would like to have than any of the others. He's been a governor now for a good many years. I guess he's the senior governor in the country in terms of longevity in office. He worked for me back in 71 and 72. I know for a fact he had his eye on the presidency that long ago. He's like Woodrow Wilson. He has long-term plans. So I think probably he has thought about more of the problems that face the country. He's not confined simply to adjustments in the capital gains tax and in the investment tax credit. He doesn't have the kind of economic blueprint, perhaps, that Zongas has, but he does think about education and health care and about the environment and about families and about the relations between the races, between the young and the old. I think he probably, at this stage of the campaign, does have a broader sweep than Senator Tsongas. These things can change, though. I think all of these candidates are growing, and with the passage of time, we may see a different picture of all of them.
Richard Trumka, does Clinton look more attractive to organized labor than Tsongas?
I would say on average, yes, he does. That there are a number of the unions that out and out support Governor Clinton over Senator Tsongas. I think that's true. I think if you look at it, he has done the second best job to this point in the campaign of articulating his message. Tsongas has been the best at articulating his message. Clinton has been, I think, the second best at articulating his message, and I think that does have some support within labor.
Clinton was regarded, John White, as the electable Democrat by many people going in, and he was almost anointed by the press, almost given the nomination a few weeks ago. Does he still look so electable and so viable a candidate?
Well, he's had a rough time the last 2 or 3 weeks, but the truth of the matter is, last night was a good night for Bill Clinton. He took some punches that normally will take a guy out of business in a presidential campaign, but he's still on his feet. He goes into an area of the country where he's better organized. He has more money. My guess is the next 2 or 3 weeks will be pretty good for Bill. Back to this presidency thing, though, in the field, Bill Clinton is a more polished campaigner than any of the others. With that comes high positives, but also it brings high negatives. So the one thing that he really has to do to be elected president is convince the American people, one, that they can trust him, and two, that he will take care of this economic situation that is really tearing this country apart.
Do you think that Bill Clinton has convinced the American people they can trust him?
I think he's restoring that trust, and he's doing it, he needs to do it on the basis of his message. He is a problem solver. He's the other kind of outsider out of Washington. That is that he's dealing with those bread and butter, market basket issues that people are concerned about, and has some evidence that he has been successful, that he knows how to tackle the kinds of things that are concerning people.
Has he, in your eyes, been so wounded by all the questions raised about him, personal questions, that he is now going to carry vulnerabilities right through, and that would make you feel uneasy about supporting him?
Well, I think what the surveys are showing us that there are still some people who aren't quite sure about trusting him character, and I think that's what the next primaries are going to be all about. Whether he can make that connection with them so that they will look at him and say, we understand what you've been through, we think you may be the better for it, and we do think that you have those qualities that can throw a rope to all of us who are treading water and know we will sink unless someone gets our economy going.
Yeah. Congresswoman Waters, what do you think about Bill Clinton as it comes out of New Hampshire?
Well, I think that he performed very, very well. He has been baptized by fire, and he came through it. He did very well, and I think perhaps he can continue to do well. However, I have to measure all of these candidates up against someone that I've worked with for 8 years who is articulate, charismatic, very bright, one of the best organizers I've ever seen in life, who won over support from labor, broke into white enclaves in this country in ways that people said he couldn't do. And when I measure them up against Jesse Jackson, it's not easy for me. It's not easy for me.
In other words, you just don't see anybody of the caliber of Jesse Jackson in the race.
Oh, well, not at this point, I don't. None of them know America as well as Jesse. None of them have traveled this country as well. None of them are as charismatic. None of them know the issues as well. Unfortunately, in America, they tell Jesse Jackson he can't do it. But those people who are presenting themselves to the American public now really do not measure up to the abilities of Jesse Jackson at this time.
Richard Trumka, at your convention in Bal Harbor, House Speaker Foley and Majority Leader Mitchell were making statements urging more Democrats to get into the race. So let me just ask you bluntly, do you want somebody else to get in now? Do you want one of those big names, the Gephardt, the Cuomo, whoever, to get in?
Well, I think all the people that you've talked about would make excellent candidates, and I think they'd make excellent presidents. I think it's probably at the point where they may be too late to get in, and I think it may be a moot question about whether we'd like them or not. I mean, they have to make that decision. No one can make it for them.
Do you think it is too late, really, in a practical sense? I mean, your labor movement represents one of the big organizing and funding support bases for any Democratic candidate. You seriously think it's too late for anyone to get in now?
As a practical matter, they couldn't get delegate slates together right now that would give them enough delegates to get the nomination going into the convention. If somebody were to get in before tomorrow, they probably could get enough delegates to, if they were very, very successful, they could get enough delegates to stop any one of the candidates from going in with the 2144 necessary to get a nomination on the first ballot.
And then force a fight at the convention, in other words.
That could very well happen. Now, the question is, given this late time and not having an organization put together, could they get in now and still do as good as they would have to do to even force that issue? And I think that's a question that is probably not one easy to answer, and I don't think you'll find many candidates right now willing to gamble on that.
John White, you've heard these rumblings, and people have obviously spoken to you about it. Is it too late? First of all, would you like to see somebody else get in if they could? And is it too late?
The truth of the matter is, I think it would help the current candidates if someone else got in. I think Tsongas last night and Billy Clinton to some degree addressed that issue and says, come on in, the water's fine.
Who would it, what kind of person getting in now would help them, and why? Why would they help them?
Well, one, I think for us to win against an incumbent, bruised and banged up though this incumbent may be, there's lots of power in an incumbent presidency. We're going to have to be able to assure not only Democrats, but to assure independents and everyone else that we're offering the very best that the Democratic Party has to offer.
You're saying you're not doing that now?
No, I'm not saying that. But the only way we can prove it is to be able to say to some of these other people, if you want to get in, we welcome you. Come on in, and if you can beat us, fine. If you can't beat us, then it's best for the party that you be in this position. So,
but you don't think
I don't. Frankly, we'll put it down, and I bear part of the blame for this, Senator, and every party chairman since the McGovern-Frazier rules carries part of it, because I think we have gotten so far into the process of selecting a nominee that we're really beginning to forget the product. Fast track, early filing deadlines, precludes lots of possibly good candidates that could come in at a later date. I know that's a moot question at this particular point, but I think it's self-defeating what we have done in many ways in the party, and we really better take another look at this process.
George McGovern, we can't argue the efficacy of the reforms in the Democratic Party nominating process that bear your name, but do you think it's time that it is a ripe time for somebody? Should somebody else get in? Is it too late? Who would get in? Who should get in if it is?
Well, let me just say, Robin, a couple of weeks ago, I personally called Governor Cuomo and urged him to get in. I thought he would add something in terms of defining the issues, even if he didn't go all the way to the nomination. I agree with Maxine Waters that we've forgotten an important part of the Democratic constituency thus far. I hope we can correct this as the campaign moves along. But Democrats can't get such an obsession with the middle class that they forget about the people under us. Most Americans think they're in the middle class, but there's about a fourth to a third of us that aren't, that are below that level. I'm talking about poor people that have been discussed very little in this campaign.
Well, is that corrected by the current Democratic candidates changing their rhetoric, or is it only corrected by somebody else getting in?
Well, I think it would help on both counts. I think that we do have candidates in the race that have genuine compassion for the poor, But somehow, and I include my friend Bill Clinton in this category, they've politically become fearful of close identification with the poor. Somehow that's regarded as too liberal or too bleeding heart or too advanced in order to be successful in an election. But we can't forget about these poor people that we see on the streets. It's getting so you can't walk down the streets in Washington without being stopped every 50 feet by somebody without a home, without food, without a job.
George,
and I don't think we ought to be afraid of being compassionate about those people.
Just let me give the others a chance to say, do you think somebody else should get in now?
I think there's a level of frustration in the people saying that they still aren't sure. And New Hampshire has them intrigued with these Democratic candidates, but I think they would welcome the courageous involvement of some of the other leaders.
Of who? Of Gephardt?
Gephardt would be a very good example, I think, of someone that they would feel was a front-running type of candidate, and he could compete with the others, and they would have a sense of selecting among them.
Yeah. And Maxine Waters, finally, what do you think? Do you think somebody else should get in?
Well, let me just take this opportunity to urge Jesse Jackson, wherever he is, to jump in. He's a proven vote-getter. We're talking about people coming in who are so-called leaders who have never run in this country. We're talking about someone who increases the debate in ways that includes people who are being left out of this debate. Okay. We're talking about someone who knows this country and knows the problems of working people. And if you polled organized labor today, they would tell you that Jesse Jackson is the only one who understands what is going on, the exportation of their jobs.
We have to,
third world countries.
I'm sorry to interrupt you,
yes.
Congresswoman, but we do have to leave it there.
All right.
And,
well, I'd ask Jesse just to come on in.
Okay. Thank you all very much for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you. Again, some of the non-political news of this Wednesday. The Labor Department said consumer prices rose just 0.1% in January. Falling energy prices and lower food costs were cited. The Commerce Department said housing starts jumped 5.5% last month, and Federal Reserve Chairman Alan Greenspan said he was optimistic about improvement in the overall economy later this year. Good night, Robin.
Good night, Judy. That's the News Hour tonight, and we'll see you tomorrow night. I'm Robert McNeil. Good night.
Part of helping the world live and communicate better is keeping it well informed. That's why funding for the McNeil-Lehrer NewsHour is provided by AT&T and by PepsiCo. And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and viewers like you.
For another take on the news, stay with OPB. Election time is just around the corner, and Mark Russell is rubbing his hands with glee. He'll have lots of new material for the